You know that feeling when you wake up tired, even after a full night's sleep, when you push through your day running on empty, wondering where your energy went? Here's something most people don't know, that fatigue may actually be happening inside your cells. That's why I've been using anti-factor lipids powder from Nutritional Therapeutics for years. I don't go a day without it. It's based on over 20 years of research and a patented process called membrane lipid replacement, which actually repairs the damaged components of your cell membranes, restoring your cell's ability to produce energy the way they did when you were younger. Clinical studies show anti-factor can reduce fatigue by up to 40%. Just 1 or 2 scoops a day. Mix it in a smoothie like I do, sprinkle it on food, and you're giving your body the science of youthful energy. Anti-Factor Lipids Powder comes in 2 convenient sizes. For more information and to order, just call 800-982-9158, 800-982-9158, or go to antifactor.com. That's antifactor.com for Anti-Factor Lipids Powder. Welcome to today's Intelligent Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ronald Hoffman. It's our weekly Q&A with Leyla, which is actually one of my favorite times of the week because we get to answer your questions. We never know what's in the inbox, but it is always generating, stimulating discussions. With me today is Leyla Mutin. Leyla is our resident nutritionist, if you don't already know. And together we do Q&A with Leyla every week. Questions come to questions@drhoffman.net. And we have quite a few questions in the mailbag. But before we get to questions, just wanted to provide you with a little bit of a case study, which is kind of illustrative of what I think are some over-the-top trends in medicine and how sometimes a second opinion from an integrative physician like myself can sometimes make a difference for patients' care.
Yes.
So I'll present the case. You can embellish it. 83-year-old woman comes to see me, and she's ostensibly quite healthy.
Yes.
She brings along a blood test, which looks good in all respects.
Yeah.
With the exception that I note that her cholesterol's a little high, not alarmingly high in my opinion. Her cholesterol is 276.
Okay.
And her LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, is in the 170s.
Yeah.
Which is considered high. But her HDL cholesterol on one test is 90.
Yes.
And her triglycerides are low.
Yeah.
And then she's
under 100, like in the 70s for triglycerides.
Yeah, which is a good sign metabolically. Her hemoglobin A1C is excellent. She has normal blood pressure, and she walks in, and she's 83, but she's a youthful 83.
Yes.
And she's also very cognitively intact.
Sharp as a tack.
Sharp as a tack.
Yeah.
Very engaged, socially, and feels good. Her exercise, maybe she could be doing a little more resistance exercise, but she says she walks a lot. And she's sort of a typical, Upper East Side New Yorker who has a lot of interests and is very engaged.
Yeah.
However, she reports that on a recent visit to a cardiologist, she's been followed for mitral valve prolapse. And indeed, when I did a heart check on her, she has a heart murmur. Mitral valve prolapse can be inconsequential. You can go to your grave at 112 with it, or sometimes it needs to be addressed with a now non-invasive treatment to fix the valve. It can be fixed through a catheter or something called a TAVR's technique, which is inserting a catheter through the wrist or the groin. And actually, Mick Jagger underwent that procedure to revise his
and he only took off touring for a year or something.
Right, and now he's 80 and he's touring.
He's 80 and he's jumping.
And I think he just had some more kids or something, whatever. Yes, young kids. So it didn't really put a crimp in his style. So anyway, so she reports that on a recent visit to her cardiologist, the cardiologist, quote, read her the riot act about being on a cholesterol-lowering medication.
She explained it as she's tired of being yelled at.
Yes.
By the doctor.
Right. Because she does have a high cholesterol. But she's, okay. So the other piece of information that's germane to this is that she underwent a EBT heart scan or a CT,
For calcium scoring.
calcium scoring test, CAC, it's sometimes referred to,
Mm-hmm.
where she has a score of 13.8, which indicates that she has some plaque.
Yeah.
But putting that into context, that's probably better than about 95% or 98% of women her age.
Yeah.
So
She's 83.
She has a very beginnings of some very small traces of plaque. By no means does that constitute blockage.
Mm-hmm.
Her cardiologist told her that she needed to be on a statin because she was at risk of having a chunk of plaque break off, which is a pretty graphic way of telling you that unless you do this, you're going to die.
Great scare tactic.
Great scare tactic, right?
Yeah.
So she comes to me, and she's been listening to me ever since I was on, flagship radio station here in New York City, which has got to be 30 plus years ago. And so she values my opinion in these matters.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what I told her first is, you're not in the office of a doctor who tells patients that they should never be on statins. So you can rely on me for an objective opinion because I recognize the value of statins in some circumstances.
Sure.
And let's say you came in and for some reason you decided at the age of 35 or 40 to get this test because perhaps you had a terrible family history. Everybody in your family was dropping dead of a heart attack at a young age, and you had this test. And we saw the same score. We saw 13.8, which is a very low score.
Very.
But for a 35-year-old female, it's unusual to begin to develop plaque at that age.
Yes.
And I would say, well, let's see, you hopefully will live another 60 years or so, maybe 70. You want to be a centenarian, you're 35 or 40.
Yeah.
During those ensuing decades with that high cholesterol, there is a chance, albeit small, because you do have a fairly high level of protective HDL, and you have other metabolic factors in your favor, that you could develop cardiovascular disease. So the case could be made that you are a candidate for protection against your high lipids.
And that's for the 30-something-year-old.
Right.
Yep.
Right. On the other hand, you're 83. So generously speaking, you only have to make it another quarter century, right?
Yeah.
Let's go
That'd
for
be
it.
great. Yeah.
Right. It is highly unlikely that with a score of 13, that even in 10 or 15 or 20 years, that you would accumulate a sufficiently high score to develop a stroke or a heart attack.
Yeah.
And so the point being is that the benefits of the statin, which are negligible, would outweigh the risks, which are, I still think statins are not as bad as they're chalked up to be, but there are considerable risks associated with statins.
Yes.
There can be cognitive problems. There can be aches and pains, reduced, ability to walk and move, balance problems.
Right. There could be increased risk of diabetes, especially in women.
Especially in women,
as
thank you. Yes.
Found in statins.
Yes, considerably higher.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I said, if you had a score of instead of 13, but 1300, I'd say, even though you're older, you should get it. But they've also done studies on what's called primary prevention versus secondary prevention. Secondary prevention means shutting the barn door after the horse gets out. You've had a heart attack. You've had a stent. You've had a bypass. You've had a stroke.
Yes.
It is.
You've already had an event.
Demonstrably beneficial to be on a statin to prevent a subsequent event. That studies confirm that.
Yeah.
Take
the statin.
At virtually any age.
Yeah.
Then there's primary prevention. Primary prevention works pretty well for men who have risk factors who are middle-aged.
Yeah.
Still, there is what's called an NNT, number needed to treat. And you might need to treat 50 men to save one man from a MACE, major adverse cardiovascular event.
Yeah.
Okay? That's what we're trying to prevent. Try to prevent MACEs. But still, 49 would take it unnecessarily. But hey, that's a value because you're going to save one guy. But for when you look at studies of primary prevention in women who have high cholesterol at 70 or 75 or 80, the results are not that strong.
Yeah.
They're negligible. So you'd have to treat maybe 500 women to prevent one event. So 499 women would take it unnecessarily.
Yeah.
So I said, I'm really quoting the science and the studies, and I try to keep up with this,
Yes.
that you do not need to be on a statin. So she goes, well, how can I lower my LDL? And I go, you don't need to lower your LDL.
Yeah.
She's on a diet which is fairly high in animal protein,
Yeah.
which is going to cause her to have a little bit of a higher LDL.
Yeah.
She says that in the past she's had an LDL.
A pattern A, big fluffy LDL.
Right. She's had that phenotype, LDL phenotype study, which is sometimes referred to as an NMR or a VAPS test, or
Yes.
LDL fractionation, or
The particle size.
particle size test.
Mm-hmm.
And she has the benign pattern, which is the large, fluffy particles.
Yeah.
So that goes in her favor in terms of reducing risk. She doesn't have any other risk factors. She's not diabetic. She's not hypertensive.
Yeah.
She should not take a statin, in my opinion. And I said, it could have gone either way. It could have been like, yes, I'm sorry, I'm the court of last resort. You come to me like on appeal, like the Court of Appeals. No, you really need to follow your cardiologist's advice. Or alternatively, I might say, well, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You could take it, but it's not going to protect you that much. If you didn't take it, I wouldn't, read you the riot, quote, read you the riot act. Sometimes I say that. So like, the benefit is there, I have to admit, but it's not decisive. You could take, if you want, you could take some bergamot, or, take vitamin K and vitamin D.
She's taking beautiful supplements.
She's taking all the right supplements.
She's taking all the right supplements.
Yeah.
She's been taking them for decades, number one.
Yeah.
Number two, she brought me a very, very thorough history of all the foods she eats.
Yes.
That pattern A LDL, those big, fluffy, desirable particles, are also a result of the way she eats, which is very, very healthy, whole foods. Yes, they're high in animal protein. But that's what's keeping her alive and keeping her from becoming sarcopenic and osteoporotic and all these
That's a
other
good point,
things.
because let's say she's were
active.
to do what tends to lower LDL, which is to go on a vegan diet. That'll generally lower LDL.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the whole picture, because that might somewhat reduce her cardiovascular risk, which is already low to begin with.
Yeah.
But at what expense? At the expense of her muscle mass,
Yes.
of her strength or vitality, even
It can cause frailty.
cognitive problems,
Yes.
potentially, because we do
Yes.
see that sometimes when we skimp on neurotransmitter precursors from protein.
Yes.
B12 deficiency, although she does take her supplements. I said, just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Leave it alone.
Absolutely.
Also, and you're well aware of this, there are studies that show epidemiologically, if you look at plot of longevity versus LDL cholesterol or total cholesterol in women over 70, the higher your LDL, the higher your cholesterol, the less likely you are to die, the more likely you are to have extended lifespan.
There you go.
Because
cholesterol is necessary.
It's a sign of a robust metabolism,
Yeah.
because it's mostly not from diet. It's mostly made from liver.
Yeah.
And if you have poor liver function, something's wrong with your body. You are becoming frail.
Yeah.
So she has robust synthesis of cholesterol.
She does. And just to illustrate the point, because it's hard when you're chronically brainwashed by the doctors out there, and even admittedly by her husband, who's been on a statin, but he has a strong family history of stroke.
Different story.
A very, very different story. Not her story at all.
Yeah.
To illustrate this, the importance of cholesterol, I said, you know who has the highest cholesterol ever in the world?
Yeah.
I told her anorexic young girls.
Okay.
Anorexic teenagers and 20-year-olds.
Yep.
You know why they have cholesterols in the 380s?
It's compensatory.
It's trying to save their lives.
It's compensatory.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she looked at me incredulous, because I'm really trying to get her away from cholesterol as a foe platform,
Right.
So, which can be hard to dispel.
Did she tell you about that concoction she takes with like fresh curcumin?
Yes.
Fresh
and ginger.
turmeric, and she
She
adds black pepper to it, and she puts it in her what?
She got this, like a quarter cup of cranberry and a little grapefruit and some of the pulp from that. And this is what she has.
Okay.
But she eats beautiful whole food.
Right.
Day in and day out.
Yeah.
So, and she has a very good appetite.
I commended her. I think she's a role model. I said that, seeing you is a little like gilding the lily, because you're already a beautiful flower and we don't need to.
Yeah. But, she came specifically for your opinion on, do I need to take this?
What I did prompt her was, I think there was a little bit of ostrich-like behavior vis-a-vis bone density, and I wanted her to get a bone density test that she's never had. So I would do that in an otherwise really good health picture.
Are you ready to experience the future of digestive wellness with Dr. Ohhira's new and revolutionary postbiotic fermented food concentrate? Capsule-free and in individual sachet packets that harness the power of 5 years of fermentation and over 500 concentrated bioactive postbiotics. Dr. Ohhira's postbiotic fermented food concentrate is a nutrient-dense paste designed to supercharge your digestive health, aid in nutrient absorption, and support whole body immune wellness. Each sachet packet delivers a potent blend of fermented paste and prebiotics which serve as fuel for your body's own unique gut microbiome. This concentrate supports your entire digestive tract, does not need refrigeration, non-GMO, dairy, and gluten-free. Dr. Ohhira's postbiotic fermented food concentrate. It is the ultimate embodiment of traditional Japanese fermented craftsmanship, designed for those who seek the highest concentration of nature's restorative power in every serving. Ask your natural products retailer for it today or online at essentialformulas.com.
Now, going on to questions, we have had 3 people email us.
Flurry of questions.
Yes, for about this particular study about niacin. Dr. Hoppen, this is from Jim. This is from Alan. Hope you'll be addressing the latest reports regarding niacin, metabolite 4P1, 4PY, and increased incidence of cardiovascular disease. As I've learned from your many articles, these studies cannot always be relied on and unfortunately elicit knee-jerk reactions.
Okay.
And they also want to know, besides addressing this, that what about in the setting of nicotinamide riboside,
which after all is a B3 metabolite. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Do we have the same concern?
Okay, so there's been a flurry of interest in this study.
So we decided to let it cut the line to your questions and address it.
Okay, so for example, NBC News reports this week, high levels of niacin may increase heart risk. CBS reports new study says vitamin B3 added to processed foods can lead to an excess of a certain kind of metabolite which triggers inflammation. Medical News Today, heart disease, can too much vitamin B3 increase risk? U.S. News and World Report, too much niacin may be bad for the heart, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a flurry of studies.
Yeah.
WebMD, excess vitamin B3 linked to increased risk of heart disease. So when I see that kind of stuff, and periodically this comes down the pike, studies like this, I say, first of all, my initial reaction is, because I'm biased, I go, that can't be.
Yeah.
I can't, I did. And then I go, well, let's look at the actual study.
Yeah.
And let's look at what they're saying, because very few of these quick hit, clickbait headlines really speak to what the study says.
Yeah.
And first of all, I will say that the researcher who did this has got a great publicist, because it's not that interesting a study, and it's gotten a major play in the media.
Yeah.
And that's because he works at the Cleveland Clinic, and the Cleveland Clinic has a big PR department to get out news that you can use.
Yes.
And this isn't quite at the level of news you can use. And it is by, just for background, it's by a guy named Dr. Stanley Hazen, who is a brilliant guy. He's an expert on, cardiovascular risk. He's also interested in the microbiome. And if you remember, there is something called TMAO.
Yes.
That is something that is considered a cardiovascular risk factor. It was said to be the link that proves that eating red meat is bad for the heart, because when you eat meat, you get carnitine, and carnitine turns into this harmful substance called trimethylamine oxide, TMAO, and this is mediated by the microbiome. Some people make more TMAO because they have this wrong kind of bacteria, and other people seem to be less susceptible to TMAO, and you also get it from choline.
Right.
Okay? Now, I have looked at that, because that came out like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I said, it really doesn't make that much sense, because many studies that look at red meat in the diet actually exonerate red meat as a cause of cardiovascular disease. And many of the studies include lots of processed meat. And by the way, many studies that say, oh, you eat a lot of red meat. Well, most people eat a lot of red meat, also eat a lot of other junk.
Right.
So there are very few people who, like you and me, we eat red meat, but it's organic, natural. It's not processed.
We're not on the pizza, French fries, and red meat diet.
Yeah, we're not eating pepperoni pizza.
Yeah.
That we don't get our red meat that way, right?
Yep.
We're not slugging down the Big Macs, whatever.
Exactly.
So anyway, so these studies are problematic. There are also some studies. Now, where do you get choline from? You get it from two sources. Fish and eggs.
Egg yolks, yes.
And soy.
Yeah.
So there are very few.
These are healthy foods.
There are very few epidemiologic studies that say that eggs, in fact, many studies exonerate eggs as a cause of cardiovascular disease, and they contain a ton of choline. I don't think any studies show that soy causes cardiovascular disease. In fact, the faux meat industry is based on substituting soy for and
meat.
then there's also fish, which epidemiologically, the more fish you eat, the less cardiovascular disease.
Exactly.
So it didn't really make sense.
So that's how the TMAO thing got debunked.
So I looked at the latest research on TMAO, and over the years, it's like, shall I test people for TMAO? Does it make sense? Or, is it just, and the latest on TMAO is that it is not associated with atherosclerosis. So people with high TMAO do not have a higher propensity to arterial blockage. But there is a little nuance to that, is that if you already have arterial blockage, high TMAO can create more plaque instability. So maybe we should pay attention to TMAO in people who have pre-existing heart disease. It doesn't cause the heart disease, but in the presence of all the other things that lead to cardiovascular disease, such as smoking, such as obesity, such as high insulin, such as, bad lipids, and Lp(a), and all these other things, that TMAO may play a role at sort of the end stage, so we would want to maybe address it. But it's not a perfect story. So Stanley Hazen, I've looked at some of the posts on X, formerly known as Twitter, where people are pushing back against this niacin study. And they said, Stanley Hazen, the guy who, wanted to make us stop using choline and L-carnitine, now has trained his sights on niacin. So what the study does, and I don't want to go into the weeds too much, is that it demonstrates that certain metabolites accumulate in people who have higher intake of niacin. And those metabolites are associated with inflammation and endothelial damage. That's what it shows. What it doesn't show, none of the people in the study were really taking supplemental niacin. It wasn't designed to assess the effects of niacin.
Right.
So
what they are saying is that fortification in foods like flour and cereal and bread, that's what they're looking at. It's fortified foods.
It's so lit.
And they're junky foods that are fortified.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. That's true too.
It's junk food that they're fortifying.
So that's interesting. It's that you have an interesting interpretation, which is the more you eat of these fortified foods, the more niacin you get. And it's not the niacin. It's a marker. It's almost like a dye marker that indicates you've been eating a lot of fortified food.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So packaged processed food.
So I think in order to really make the case that niacin causes cardiovascular disease, you would have to do a study of many years duration looking at people supplemented with niacin or supplemented with NAD or NMN or niacinamide. And by the way, we have people on niacinamide sometimes for prevention of skin cancer. There's some real benefits. But here's the interesting part about it is, going back a few years, there's actually an article, which is, in a journal called, Mediators of Inflammation.
That's the name of a journal, huh? Mediators of Inflammation.
That just made, I can't find the name of the journal, but it does.
Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Niacin inhibits vascular inflammation via downregulating nuclear transcription factor NF-kappa B signaling pathways. That's That's a well-known
That's a well-known pathway.
Pathway of inflammation, the
Yeah.
NF-kappa B.
Mm-hmm.
So what they say here is that it attenuated oxidative stress in guinea pigs that have been fed a high-fat diet. These data suggest for the first time that niacin inhibits vascular inflammation in vivo and in vitro. Niacin also modulates plasma lipid by upregulating the expression of factors involved in the process of reverse cholesterol transport. Well, we know that. Okay, so go back to the 1980s, and there was a guy named Kowalski, not Stanley Kowalski, like in Streetcar Named Desire.
Oh, okay.
But Kowalski.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book called The 8-Week Cholesterol Cure. And he said, this is when we just started getting obsessed with cholesterol.
Yes.
He says, if you take niacin at high doses, you're going to lower your cholesterol. And indeed, it lowers cholesterol and it raises HDL. So.
And it lowers lipoprotein(a), we found out.
Well, it also does that.
That's a more important risk factor.
That is a very important risk factor.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening is people started taking really high doses willy-nilly, and some of them damaged their liver, which can happen when you take 2, 3, 4,000, 5,000 of niacin.
Yeah.
You get terrible flushing, and, you don't want to go on a Zoom call right before, right after you take your niacin, because you're going to look red as a beet.
Yes.
So anyway, they then did some research where they were going to create a non-flush niacin, not like you find in the health food store, because those non-flush niacins are worthless. But they were going to team it with a drug that suppresses the flush. And what they found with that drug is it didn't really reduce cardiovascular disease. So Hazen says maybe that's because niacin, in spite of its lowering of cholesterol, it also has this pro-inflammatory effect. And it explains why niacin doesn't really work. But there's some people who really stand up for niacin and say that, there is potential for niacin.
Yeah.
Some of the little bit of contrarians in cardiovascular medicine say that niacin has some value, especially for people with high triglycerides. It lowers triglycerides very well.
Yep.
But anyway, that study was, I think, called the AIM High study, was the death knell for niacin. It just they said, if the drug companies couldn't develop a niacin that lowered cardiovascular disease, so what it also shows is that just lowering cholesterol and raising HDL isn't the end all and be all of cardiovascular.
That's right.
Right. So
people with normal cholesterols are having, cholesterol are having.
When it comes to NAD,
yeah,
I take NAD, and I won't be dissuaded from taking NAD.
I'm not going to not take my B complex anymore.
Yeah.
Or my methyl action supplement anymore, or my...
here's a study.
Yeah.
This is fairly recent. It is from, it's 2018. Nicotinamide riboside shows promise for reversing cardiovascular aging. It was shown to mimic caloric restriction, which is causing autophagy.
Right. It helps increase the sirtuins.
Yeah, sirtuin pathway. And also in these patients, it lowered blood pressure by 10 points in a small study. 24 lean and healthy men. Blood pressure came down. They took 500 milligram twice daily of nicotinamide riboside, which is what I take.
Yeah.
And their blood pressure came down. So that, I think, is a sign of relative safety. But I'm going to keep my eyes open on this because I think that this study will be followed up. But just like, he made a big splash with the TMAO.
Yeah.
And TMAO was all the rage for a while. And now it's sort of like, it's, it kind of depends. It's like, don't worry too much about TMAO. It didn't really stand the test of time. And I don't think this study is going to stand the test of time.
No.
And I don't think it's cause for abandoning taking niacin. I think that there's, I don't know, you brought up a good point, is it the fortification of foods?
Or the fortification?
Or is it
the foods?
Or is it the foods that are fortified?
Yes.
Because
they're really extrapolate. I mean, this is a real reach, in my opinion.
I appreciate the science there, and there's actually some nutrigenomics involved because they're looking at various SNPs genetically that generate these so-called harmful byproducts of niacin. And then they test the harmful byproducts of niacin. But it's a train of causation
Yeah.
that is has to be demonstrated in vivo. In other words,
In the body.
practically speaking, do people taking niacin experience adverse cardiovascular outcomes?
Right.
And
They simply found metabolites in plasma.
yeah,
Is all
yeah,
they really
yeah,
did.
yeah.
So, yeah. And again, Cleveland Clinic and what is the other, not John Hopkins, but the other one, the other big hospital,
Mayo.
Clinic.
Yeah.
Some of these are quite, can I use the word captured by pharma and the wheel that keeps turning on, hoping to run over.
Well, I think there's always
lifestyle medicine.
There's always
and
room for a
supplements.
study that shows that fish oil is harmful, or that
Sure.
that niacin is harmful,
Yeah.
or that vitamin D isn't cracked up to what it's supposed to be. There is a bit of a bias in that direction, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is that. So
And
Jim,
but it's
Alan,
early. Whenever this happens, I kind of sit back and I say, let me see what some of my very scholarly colleagues who are versed in molecular biology have to say about this.
yeah,
And I, even though this has only been out for a few days, some fairly reasonable pushback has emerged to this study.
mm-hmm.
And so I would say, keep your powder dry. Let's keep an open mind, because I don't want to, dismiss out of hand any study that suggests that a vitamin may be harmful, because we sometimes have to revise our views. Like beta carotene, we thought was the bomb.
Right.
And then it's maybe not such a good idea to give just one single carotenoid. Maybe we should be giving the full spectrum of carotenoids together. Now that's all I prescribe now. I don't prescribe beta carotene anymore.
Right. And my advice would be stop eating fortified foods, because they're generally junk food.
Right.
Don't bother with that.
Right.
Eat your brown rice. Don't eat the rice
And
fortified with. Don't eat the bread fortified with
cereal,
or the sack of flour fortified with.
Well, so like Tony cereal. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Right.
Exactly.
But it's not the smattering of vitamins.
Right.
And there's such a tiny amount of niacin in those things.
It's true.
And so there is a medical condition that happens when you have niacin deficiency called pellagra. Pellagra used to be common in the United States before fortification. Fortification was undertaken when typically you would be on a diet of, grits, like white refined grits, and pork, and pork back.
Yeah.
Like fatty pork.
Yeah.
No vegetables, then you get no niacin.
Yeah. So there's that. Fortification also happened as a result of birth defects like spina bifida, the addition of folate.
Right.
That was
That's been
one.
a great public health boon.
Yeah. Remember all the March of Dimes events and things like that.
Then they even came up with a scare on folate. They said, it could increase cancer.
Yes.
But then what they discovered was that these small amounts net don't increase cancer.
No.
I wouldn't give massive amounts of folate to someone who has cancer.
Right.
Or is recovering from cancer, because of it sometimes maybe it's both a tumor suppressor and a tumor promoter simultaneously.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot we have to learn about vitamins and supplementation. And, I think he's an earnest guy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's like he's simply doing this at the bidding of the makers of statin drugs. Although I'm pretty sure that most of his money does come from pharmaceutical underwriting.
Yeah.
As it was most of these guys.
Most of these guys. So they might walk in and say, find something wrong with this. Find something wrong with that.
Right.
Write about it.
Right.
We'll see. Okay. All right. Alan and Jim, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, or we can depend on our listeners for challenging us. And, I actually enjoy the challenge of doing a deep dive on some of these studies, which on the face seem alarming. And, I think it's a service to try and shed some light on them, interpret them in a way that is...
it's balanced.
Balanced, yeah. Balance is the word.
And critical thinking.
Yeah.
Really.
So we generally pause to divide our podcast into two parts. So Leyla, give us a preview of what we're going to tackle in part 2.
What does it mean to have spasms in your sleep? Like screaming attacks and fighting me while sleeping?
Wow.
My husband is having this issue.
Yeah, that's more than like a calf cramp, right? That's
Mhm.
okay. So we'll tackle that when we return. I'm Dr. Ronald Hoffman, today with Leyla Mutin. It's our weekly Q&A with Leyla, and we'll be answering more of your questions in part 2.